get to a key point here, since I think we're raising the specter of what I'm calling scientism. This is the view, essentially, that Atkins is defending. Science has this power that is unique, only science has it, and that is universal and unlimited in scope. Science gives us the truth, and science is the only thing that gives us the truth. And science gives us the whole truth. All the truth that is there to be had comes to us through science. One of the issues I want to raise here, and link this back up to our initial discussion of Nietzsche, start of the semester, and the nihilistic crisis, is he talks here in the second paragraph, in the sentence that you were just quoting, about the ability of the human brain to study anything. It's out there, I can study it. If I can observe it, I can systematize my observations and draw conclusions from them in this Cartesian, Baconian way. And I can eventually arrive at knowledge if there's any knowledge to be had. And this would include, then, the activity of the human brain itself. So I can see what my brain does. I can discover that human brains with condition, again, back to my example of schizophrenia, react favorably to small doses of lithium. Is this self-knowledge in the philosophical sense? We talked about self-knowledge with Socrates. We talked about the Delphic oracle and the injunction to know thyself. We talked about the ideal, at least in my sections of the 103. We talked about the ideal of self-knowledge, knowing what you are, what is good for you, what are the conditions of your flourishing, and then most importantly, how to achieve happiness. What's the difference between the kind of knowledge that the brain has of the brain that Atkins is praising? See, that it's not even the case. It is not the case that the brain can account for everything except itself. The brain can account for everything, including itself. How is this different from philosophical self-knowledge? Scientific self-knowledge versus philosophical self-knowledge? What do you think?
Is scientific self-knowledge like the physical, like what's apparent, and then philosophical is like deeper, almost spiritual?
We want to look a little more closely at that idea of spiritual or of depth. I think you're onto something. Maybe we can articulate it a little bit more precisely. So I use my brain to study my brain, and discover things about my individual brain, that I need certain things, I need to avoid certain things that might be good or bad for other people, or good or bad in general, but they're especially bad for me. But even more generally, we as the human race can know things about brains. I can know when somebody's suffering from depression. I can know that depression is not just a matter of personal vice or personal weakness, but has some kind of medical cause in most cases.
For people, it's harder to define something you can't quantify.
Okay. We do get quantifiable knowledge out of science. This is one of the principles that we saw in Descartes as well when he considers the wax. What is the wax? The wax really seems to be known ultimately through the mind, but the mind has to quantify extension in order to know it. Right? It's so many grams of wax. If I were to ask you about the temperature in this room, how would you describe the temperature in this room? You'd say it's cold or hot. Say it's colder than my dorm room, it's warmer than outside.
Varies depending on the person.
I can talk about the subjective feeling of how it is, right?
Yeah.
It's too hot for you, too cold for her, it's just right for me.
Yeah.
Okay? Or it's stuffy, I need to take my jacket off, etc. I can talk about the lived experience of the temperature, but we really want to drill down and say, what is the temperature of this room? We would give a number. Yeah, it's 74 degrees. We quantify and say, that's the objective reality, and then how, too hot for you, too cold for you, that's all the subjective experience of it. But what's really going on here is a certain energy level in the air molecules in this room, averaged across the entire room, and the level of mercury in that thermometer, that instrument. That's another element that we talked about in Galileo, right? Use of instruments to measure this. That quantifiable number, that's the reality of the situation. The trouble we look at as we're moving forward towards Nietzsche is the separation between the lived experience, which is one thing, seems to be subjective and variable, and the objective reality. The question is, do these things diverge? Or if whether they diverge or not, are we at risk of valuing one at the expense of the other? Is there something lost in the lived experience of the world if we think of the true reality of it as being quantifiable parts? So I get basically all the things that would fit into my evolutionary profile, right? Things that allow me to continue surviving. I recognize danger, I flee from it. I'm Try to stop sharing this. I recognize danger and I flee from it. I recognize things that are good to eat and pursue those. So all these things that basically animals have to do to stay alive, human races have to stay alive. Fit into this deeper idea. So I'm wondering if this is connected with another thing we talked about with Nietzsche. Sources of meaning. We've considered whether there's a crisis of meaning. Do we get meaning out of scientific self-knowing? We get a sense of what life is for, what it's all about. Or if we don't, perhaps it's not a problem, perhaps that's just a subjective issue that you have to solve. Right? You have to feel that your life is meaningless. We can treat that as just another empirical problem about you. And this is one of the ways in which a philosophical or something, maybe one dimension of what Virginia called the deeper, or more spiritual side of philosophical or Socratic self-knowing. Rebecca?
But it could be true though that there's no meaning, and what you're searching for something deeper just to get to the point that there's nothing. But science.
Okay. What if I do my philosophy, and this may be what Atkins essentially has done, he's not showing his work. What if I use my philosophy, I drill down deep into the human person and into the nature of the cosmos, the nature of human rationality? There's nothing there. Those things that the other philosophers thought they had discovered, sources of meaning, existence of God, there's nothing there. What you have essentially here is the death of God. What you have is what Nietzsche was recognizing around the middle of the 19th century. Nietzsche thinks. Europeans, intellectuals first, and then the general population thinks. Just sort of realized that, at least in terms of Christianity and in terms of most philosophy, there's just nothing there. There's no truth there. They stopped believing. It became impossible anymore to believe in Christian narrative, the new historical, critical biblical scholarship of David Strauss and others have exposed just the historical origins of the Gospels, and it was not possible to believe anymore in these things. But what do you do when you realize that there's nothing there? In a sense, you face your own nihilistic crisis. And I think that one way of analyzing this crisis is to say, you really have two options. Right? One is just despair and suicide, and the other is to continue, not to commit suicide, not to despair. To try to find some source of meaning in science, in material. What's Nietzsche's reaction to this crisis? I'll throw it up this way. There's a three-part option. If you realize there's nothing there, your philosophy exposes the vacuity of philosophical and religious answers to the meaning of human life. Some kind of cosmic nihilist. You realize there is no meaning out there. Well, either there's no meaning at all, despair, suicide, or you find some new meaning where maybe in science, maybe you create it yourself. That's a hint of Nietzsche's solution. Or maybe you just learn to do without it. What did I ask before just a minute ago? What is Nietzsche's answer? That's it. Mind for anybody? What are the two figures that Nietzsche contrasts? It's just prologue. What are they? The Overman and the Last Man. How does the Overman react? The Overman is a type of reaction to this nihilistic crisis. Right? This is the crisis, the realization of nothing there. There's no meaning, no source of meaning. The Overman is the guy from the middle option. What does he do? He creates his own meaning. Generates his own meaning from scratch. Out of the power of his will. This is the Overman. Somebody doing without meaning, that might be the Last Man. Last Man is the sort of democratic individual who, maybe I'm going to sort of guess here a little bit. Maybe the Last Man is the individual who's realized there's no meaning and is okay with that. I'm okay with just living life in comfort and prosperity, seeking as much pleasure as I can reasonably get, and not concerned about anything larger or more ambitious than that. The third option, I guess, is just to give up. Which option is that? Thought about that after reading his essay? This doesn't seem like a despair sort of person, so I don't think that he's especially troubled by this. Do they find new meaning in science? Okay. What sort of meaning might we expect to find? Do you have any indication of what Atkins finds? The question here is in some ways kind of a psychological, existential question, just how do you go on? How do you wake up and face the day without some kind of grand narrative in which you're embedded? It's the narrative of salvation for the religious believer, or seeking happiness, or coming up with some sort of knowledge of the world through philosophy. It looks to me like maybe what's happening in Atkins is we're seeing science sort of wearing the clothing of philosophy, the clothing we had previously seen philosophy wearing. By clothing, I mean science now here is saying, this is knowledge, this is truth, this is all you're going to get. And this is good enough. This is not going to drive you to despair or to indolence, sort of cultural indifference. But the last man, I'm happy and excited to be part of this new project of the brain knowing the brain. One of the things that's missing from this, however, I think, is a sense of wholeness, a sense of the holistic sense of being able to grasp the entirety of the world and my place in it. It's a sense of the whole that I think gives philosophy its meaning-giving value. It's the ability to answer these core existential questions that drive us. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? What's significant about my existence? That gets religious and philosophical answers through most of history. I'll leave it as sort of a question for later on. Can an accumulation of quantifiable knowledge about the physical world, including the knowledge of the brain that would constitute this kind of scientific self, can that accumulation amount to, or substitute for, or play the same role as a sort of knowledge of the whole of reality, including the self's place in it? That's kind of the core of the meaning question that I'm getting at right now.